Hey guys, so today I have a video for you where I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in January. I'm looking forward to sharing this with you because I almost read as many books in January as I did the entirety of last year. And that's pretty incredible for me. If you've been paying attention to my reading journey, this is the year where I've really dove into reading as a hobby and more so as an obsession and an addiction, which is why I created this channel. Did slow down the last week of January. I probably could have added one or two more books to this list. I slowed down a little bit, which I'll get to at the end when I tell you what book I was finishing up at the end of January. I also started writing more in my book, which was more of a slow-paced thing where I would write a little bit here and there, but I ended up writing near 80 to 90 pages of my novel this last week alone. And so I'm really excited about that, but I'll be posting other videos talking about my writing here on this channel because this is not just a journey to document my reading, but also my writing, as I've been working on a fantasy fiction novel for 5 to 7 years now. But today we're talking about the books that I read in January 2025. So without further ado, let's get to that. So first on this list is in the Warhammer universe. If you've paid attention to some of my other videos, you'll know that I was reading these. The first book in the Horus Heresy series, which is under the Warhammer universe. There's hundreds of books in Warhammer. And in the Horus Heresy series, there's, I think, 52 books. There is a special little diagram online somewhere that looks like a family tree of sorts. You would be shocked at the complexity of reading the Warhammer universe. But the beauty is that the first 5 books are pretty linear and you're able to go from there and then it branches out into this chaotic tree looking root system. So I'm going to include in this a book that I finished just before January started, like on December 30th. It was Horus Rising, which is the first book in the Horus Heresy series. Then I read False Gods, Galaxy in Flames, The Flight of the Eisenstein, and Fulgrim. Technically, Horus Rising, the first one, I did read in December. But that's okay. I'm going to throw it in here just for continuity purposes. Horus Rising, False Gods, and Galaxy in Flames, the first 3 are one storyline and follow mostly the same characters throughout the entire thing. There might be some slight additions here and there in book 2 and 3, but overall, it's pretty linear. It's really good. I really liked these 3 books. As a whole, it was kind of what got me addicted to reading. I started reading them and I realized how much I enjoyed it. And once I finished one, I had to go to the next, Then the sense of accomplishment and completion took over and caused me to want to just read more and more and more, which is then how I discovered booktube, because I started looking up fantasy books, recommendations. This is the journey we ended up on. So thanks to these books, I was able to do that. They all have different authors. The first 3, Horus Rising is Dan Abnett, False Gods is Graham McNeil, and Galaxy in Flames is Ben Counter. Now, I think Galaxy in Flames, the third, was a beautiful wrap-up to the story arcs that we had, yet also the beginning of the Horus Heresy timeline. It was incredible, really leaves you with a sense of destruction. Like, it hurts inside. I'm being honest. It was a book that definitely broke me a little bit, but not as much as the second book, False Gods.
But I need you to need me back. Okay, why wouldn't you tell me about the kiss? And why didn't you call me while you were away? And why won't you ever just let me all the way in?
Now, the reason the second book broke me even more was because the philosophical question that it asked the reader and the allegory that is in it. And I'm not sure too many people would pick up on that. I'm not saying that I'm above anybody else and more intellectual or whatever. I'm not trying to insult anybody's intelligence or act condescending. I'm just saying that with the action-packed journey that it is and the fantasy world, sometimes we can miss what is right in front of us. And I think what was right in front of us with book 2, False Gods, was a very, very deep, impactful question that we should all have to ask ourselves. And I think that's why False Gods was my favorite. Getting to book 4 and 5, Flight of the Eisenstein and Fulgrim. Flight of the Eisenstein was good and so was Fulgrim, but they weren't as good. And one of the reasons why was because they backtracked and covered some of the same story as the first 3 books, just from a slightly different perspective. I didn't mind it, but there was enough duplicity that I didn't love it. And especially when I got to Fulgrim, I found myself wanting to skim more and more. I was also rushing through Fulgrim because I wanted to get to the next book on this list. I will say Flight of the Eisenstein was maybe my least favorite. Fulgrim was going to be my least favorite, but I think The introduction of certain characters in Fulgrim towards the latter half made it worth it, as well as the ending to Fulgrim was so dark that it just was, but in a good way, in a I want to read more way. Those two books wrap up the first 5 books that I read in January, technically 4, but we're going to do it for continuity's sake again. The next book that I read this year was Breath of the Dragon. Now, this came out in January, and based on the description, I was the most excited to read this book. I don't know if my excitement exceeded the result, but overall, I would highly recommend Breath of the Dragon. I think that it was really good. It's the first in the Breathmark series. It's written by Shannon Lee, and I think also Fonda Lee. This book truly was impactful. It was quite a journey. I loved the character, the main character in it, character development through it, and some of the hardship that he faced. And I like the world that we're building. And of course, I'm a sucker for a martial arts tournament. It's some of the best movies, animes, shows, and now books that you could possibly write. I loved it so much. I definitely recommend Breath of the Dragon. I think it's slipping under the radar for a lot of people. It doesn't seem like I've seen as many people talking about it. I definitely recommend it. You should go read it. Next on this list, and I realize on my Goodreads it's not near the top here, but it's because I didn't specify the date that I read it because I got it from a library and didn't read it on my Kindle. So it is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This book was pretty interesting. I found myself being able to speed read a lot of it because certain parts of it are so detailed in actually the math and surviving in space and doing all this stuff that I just didn't really care. And I was able to speed read through some of that and get to the more impactful moments. I have to say the flashbacks in the book, like at the very beginning, the flashbacks and memories were really, really impactful and interesting. Then we get to the middle flashbacks and none of them really seemed like they had an impact. They just seemed like they were thrown in there to make the book longer. But then you see that they were just building up the later flashbacks, which then have a super deep impact on the book. The ending wasn't exactly what I wanted, but the book was a really fun journey, and I could see why so many people recommend it for first-time readers, though I still don't think it's that amazing, especially with what book comes next on this list. Next on this list is a book that I saw recommended so much, and it is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Now, I was a little skeptical going into it because of how much hype was around this book. I've heard from quite a few people that it's amazing, and when I started reading it, just the first chapter to 2 chapters, I was just like, why is this so hard to read? His writing style or something, it felt like every sentence was so important that I couldn't just read a sentence and be okay reading it. I had to reread it again. Something, I don't know if it was the rhythm. I don't know what it was, but I was reading Red Rising and I just wasn't getting into it. And it was chapters 2 or 3 maybe where I'm just like, am I going to have the opinion to oppose everybody else that this is not that good? And then the book got me. Literally like chapter 4 or 5, I don't remember which one, but it hooks you and it breaks your heart and it hurts you and it makes you feel miserable to the point where now you are a red. In a world where reds are bottom of the bottom, you are now a red and you want to take down the system and the golds. And then the book went on a direction that I never anticipated. I'm left dumbfounded with the fact that this book never got the movie deal that the Hunger Games did. Now, I think Hunger Games was published first, but Hunger Games doesn't even come close to touching Red Rising. Like, not even in the same ballpark. I'm sorry. Hunger Games fans out there, people who love it, that's good. I'm not saying I don't like Hunger Games, but it is how good Red Rising is. And I've heard from multiple people that the first book in the Red Rising series is the worst of the 3 in the first trilogy. So that it gets better in the second and the third book? Are you kidding me? How could it get better than book 1? How? Because it was unreal. I found myself reading 300 plus pages in one day because I couldn't put it down. Tell me how this book, it's insane. I think it's the best book I've ever read. I'm not going to say it's the most impactful, like it has some deep allegory in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it somewhat does, but it's not the most impactful. But as far as entertainment, sucking me in and just making me feel stressed beyond belief, and then just so much, I'm impressed by this book. It was amazing. which I think set me up for failure for the last book that I was trying to read in January. I was trying to hustle through a trilogy because the first 2 books are rather short. The third one seemed a bit longer, so I thought it would carry me over a couple days into February, and then I'll finish them, and then I'll get on my Kindle Unlimited grind for the month of February because that's a video that I'm going to be doing. Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis and his sci-fi trilogy. This book is very interesting, and I don't hate it. But there's something about it that leaves me a bit bewildered. I don't love it. I did not finish this book, by the way. I started it in January, and I didn't even get through the first one. It was so difficult to read. The writing style or the continuity of it, it felt like he's describing things that I don't need to know about, but I'm left reading it because I think that it's going to be important, then it turns out to not be important. But the main story is very interesting of getting to this planet, Ransom, and going through all of this and meeting the fictitious names that I'm terrible at pronouncing, all these different things. It was a fascinating concept. But then once again, we run into a time and a place where now we are describing things that I don't necessarily see as relevant. And now I just spent pages reading that. I want to have the story happen. I feel like I'm reading the diary of the main character rather than reading a story. Now, that's a way that a story can be written. I'm not saying it's a wrong way to be writing a story because I don't think there's an objective way to say that. But from my perspective and opinion, it wasn't my favorite writing style or storytelling. So I will be coming back to Out of the Silent Planet. I will be finishing the sci-fi trilogy, but I'm already had plans for February to read and to do a video where I talk about reading as many books as I possibly can in the month of February. So I don't know if I'm going to finish the sci-fi trilogy as of right now. I'm hoping that this doesn't stay on my DNF list for the year, but it is going to be on my DNF list for January. And moving into February, I have several other books that I'm going to be reading. That is all the books that I read in January, including one DNF already this year. I hate to say it, but it's true. Really quick, an announcement that you would be looking forward to. For February, I know it's already February 3rd when I'm posting this, but for February, I am going to be accepting this deal that I got in an email via Kindle Unlimited, getting it for really cheap for 2 months. And I live in Wisconsin, where February and March is a very depressive time of year, so I need to throw myself into the books. And my plan is to read as many books as humanly possible in February. And I have a long TBR. I'm going to finish the Red Rising series, at least the first 3. I'm going to do Jade City by Fonda Lee. I'm going to get into some Joanne Abercrombie. I'm going to get into all sorts of books that are on my TBR that I could not find at my library and I am too cheap to buy. I'm going to go to Kindle Unlimited and read as much as I possibly can and come back at the end of February, hopefully being able to share with you how many books I read and have it be an absurd amount. Now, I already feel like I've read an absurd amount. My goal was 25 books this year, and I've already read, is it 7 or 8 books? That's kind of crazy, but I'm obsessed with reading lately, and that's what this YouTube channel is all about, my journey through reading. If you like that, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for watching.